So, yesterday we started talking about the main committees, or these are the general term of the different types of committees. So we went over that some the other day, standing, select, joint, and then we started talking about them more specifically. Standing is definitely the permanent. It's always there. We're going to always have military. We're going to always have a need for energy, ranching, farming, growing cotton so we can have clothes. Agriculture is always there. And then our most important committees are going to be our financial ones. Mentioned there at the bottom, Ways and Means on the House side, and Senate Finance Committee on the Senate side. Okay, so the budget generates in Congress, and there has to be an agreement with the President and Congress for a budget to carry forward. This is why we've had so much trouble. And while we went into a government shutdown more recently with Trump, these links I have here, of course, are to the C-SPAN videos on the 1995 government shutdown, and we took a look at that. Okay, so oversight. This is making sure that agencies or different components of the government are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Basically, it's the accountability component. Okay. The Senate gets to be a part of confirming presidential appointments. I've mentioned before about that the Senate sometimes can find themselves in a split, 50-50 votes on an appointment by the president, and the vice president have to come in and vote. So there'd be a 51-50 type of vote. But so appointments, and that's ambassadors, judges, leaders of different departments, all those things that are appointed by the president. Some additional things is we see where Congress determines what's most important by setting up the agenda for legislative action. What's going to come onto the floor? What might not make it to the floor? Okay. Sometimes, and I will tell you that right now we are through an election season, 2018. So right now we don't have any people being elected until about 2020. Okay. So you're going to see more legislative activity right now until about next year this time, until about Christmas. Okay? Because with no real people elections, there's no primaries, there's no general elections going on, so there's no real reason for people to lose their seats. Okay? And Americans tend to forget pretty quickly. So 2 years from now, if we're during our March primaries and an opponent for a sitting senator or a sitting representative, an opponent says, well, remember when you voted a year ago on such and such issue? A lot of Americans are kind of like, that's water under the bridge. We don't care about that anymore. Let's move along. Okay. So there's legislative action right now, because especially the ones that are more controversial, because they're not going to create ripple effects or hiccups during the election season. Okay. Congressional hearings, we see this a lot. In investigations, we're seeing that a lot right now. When you look at the investigations going on with whether or not there was collusion with Russia, Trump, that's an investigation that's been going on for a couple of years now. You'll see hearings from senators, representatives. Last fall, we saw some hearings that involved like Google and Facebook and Twitter about using people's personal information and whether people really knew that or not. We saw some hearings on that. So some of these things are really critical. Some of them are a little bit more like, I remember Congress at one time tried to have some hearings about baseball and the use of human growth hormones and whether or not that was okay. And they tried to do hearings on that, and a lot of people were thinking, why are you focusing on baseball? But anyway, and there was also questions of steroids, and there was even a time when there was talk of Congress taking up the issue of football college playoff. The college playoff system for football now has, a semifinal and then a final. It hasn't always been that way. And there was talk about Congress getting involved in that, and a lot of people were thinking, okay, wait a minute, that's a bit much. Okay, so sometimes hearings are just kind of a use of taxpayer money, maybe a little bit less important, but then sometimes they're really critical issues. Okay. Then, of course, there's also the ability and power to impeach and remove president or a Supreme Court justice or a federal judge. You can do that with Congress. A few more points of impeachment efforts. And executive officials as well. Cabinet, department heads. Okay. And I've mentioned before about how Congress, the U.S. representatives, act as more of a grand jury, and the Senate actually conducts the trial with the Supreme Court justice. The Chief Justice acts as the judge in the Senate during the actual trial. Okay. And that's for the impeachment process. So the main thing here is to understand that the House acts as a grand jury to see whether or not there's enough preponderance of evidence to impeach, and then the Senate does the actual trial. And you may say, well, what constitutes high crimes? What constitutes misdemeanors? Those things have to be sorted out throughout the process. Okay, so now we get into the next, after standing, we get into the select committees. Okay, these are temporarily put together to focus on specific issues. Okay. These groups cannot take legislation to change. They can hold hearings for particular problems, maybe bring some attention to issues that are not necessarily covered in other committees. Maybe it's an issue of an epidemic of opioid overdosing, which has been talked about a lot here lately. Maybe that's not something that would necessarily fall under a standing committee, or maybe it would fall under Health and Human Services, but there's not really a committee on overuse or overdosing on opioids. So that might be a select committee that gets formed to investigate and study that effort or that problem. So select committees. Then we're going to have our joint committees. This was the third in that list of the types of committees. So we're going to have basically what it sounds like. You're going to combine from the Senate and the House. And these are just some of the committees you might see: the economic, taxation, library and printing. Some of them can be more permanent, but they would also not be the committee that would take legislation to the floor. Okay. Maybe more like information gathering effort, or something that's internal to Congress. Internal meaning if they need to investigate some efficiency efforts by Congress, they could be put together to do that. I know a couple of years ago there were a lot of accusations thrown around about different congressional members abused their power and maybe sexual misconduct with workers and staff members and so on and so forth. And some people resigned, some senators resigned over that. And what it led to is a joint committee to say, hey, look, maybe we need to make Congress more aware of appropriate behavior. Okay, that would be an example of something that's internal to Congress. Okay, conference committees. These are temporary committees, and they have a lot to do with legislation, with turning legislation into law. Okay, so you're going to see members appointed by the Speaker of the House. Remember, the Speaker is going to be the one who doles out all these committee assignments, and the Speaker is going to be from the party that's in power because they have the more representatives elected to the House. And then the majority leader of the Senate is going to have a lot to do with those committee assignments. So for a bill to become law, the same wording of the bill has to pass in the House and in the Senate. So if it passes in the House, it'll go to the Senate. If it passes in the Senate, it'll go to the House. And they have to be both. If they're not the same, it's not going to work. Okay? And so the conference committee is going to be helpful in putting together that final wording so that we have the same wording in the legislation before it can go to turn into law. Okay, so we're going to, every congressional member has staff. They do a lot of the work for them. Okay? They're going to do the day-to-day grind. Okay? Now, the staff does not go out on the floor and present the legislation. That's still up to the congressional member. The staff person is not going to be the one that's doing the debate, the actual debate. Or the staff person is not going to be the one to actually, if there is a candidate for them, they'll be there, but there's still a lot that the U.S. representative or the senator, him or herself, has to do. But they do a lot of the day-to-day operations. They're really, the staff is really integral and really a key component to the success of any congressional meeting. Okay, how many of y'all have played Chutes and Ladders? Several. A game that I despise because it can last ever, right? Because it truly is, you know, depending on how well. Now I have learned with my 5-year-old, if I slant, you know, the spinner just enough, it'll either work in my favor or in his favor, and we'll get this game over with a little bit more quicker. But you know how Chutes and Ladders it works. You move ahead 5 spaces. Sometimes you land on a ladder and you get to climb up. Sometimes you land on a chute or a slide, and you have to spiral all the way back down to where you started. Okay. Creating law is similar to that way. You could actually almost make a game board or a game out of how law works, how putting together a law, because it has to succeed in one part, and then it goes to the other house, and then it has to go back for some markups, and then it has to go to the president's desk. There's a whole process, and your book goes into that more specifically. It would really take a whole class period just to go item by item, and we don't want to do that. I'm going to let you look at that a bit more in your textbook and get more familiar with that. But we do know that it has to, if it's introduced in the House, it has to be voted on and approved in the House, and then it goes to the Senate, and has to survive the process in the Senate, and then it can go to the President. So right now, even though the Democrats have control of the U.S. House of Representatives. Let me ask you, is much of their legislation going to get very far? Who's in control of the Senate? Republicans, right? Republicans are in control of the Senate with 53 Republican senators. And, you know, are they going to get on board with what Democrats might pass through the House? The House, because of Democrat support, has passed two recent bills dealing with gun regulation. Okay, we'll see what happens. I think one of them deals more with background checks. That might go through the Senate, because there's a few Republican senators who are a little bit more on the fence and a little bit more concerned about gun control. So that could very well pass through, but anything more restrictive on guns is likely not going to pass through the Senate. And then it still has to be at the desk of the president. And remember, the only way Congress can overturn a president's veto is with a 2/3 vote. And there's not quite 2/3 dominance of Democrats in Congress right now. Okay, so there's still a lot of hiccups that U.S. representatives would have to go through, even though they're more Democrat right now. Okay, so basically a bill is this proposed law that has been sponsored. It's not law yet, it's just proposed. Okay, it gets submitted and then it gets assigned to a committee. That committee, they may have a hearing. They may, just do some feasibility study that say, oh, this is good, this is bad. And honestly, most of them don't even make it to be voted on. They just die because they're either too hard to implement, they're not popular enough, they're not strong enough, they're too weak, any of those things. Or they're too strong. Any of those things can occur. Okay, you need to know what a markup is. Committee markup is a session in which a committee rewrites legislation to incorporate some changes that lawmakers feel need to be added. Okay, that's a markup. And then the committee will send that back to the floor. You don't have to write all of that down except for understanding a markup, a committee markup, and then the deck will go back to the floor. Okay. Okay. Just make sure you understand that the amount of time or the rules for debate on the floor is determined by the rules committee. Okay. I've said before that whoever gets to make the rules for the game generally gets to win the game. Okay. If you get to make the rules, most likely you're going to make them toward your favor. Okay. It's the same with Democrats and Republicans. Whoever is in control of the House or the Senate, and they get to make the rules, they get to put people in positions of making the rules, then they often get to have things swing in their favor. Okay. Okay. The filibuster. This only happens with the Senate side. You can talk and talk and talk for so long to try to take up so long on an issue, on an item, that either it's just dropped, runs out of time, or the senators vote by 60 to basically shut you up. Okay, that's just a tactic used to try to stall voting on an issue. Okay. I've said this before. Once a bill clears the chamber, it's sent to the other chamber. Okay. And then it's got to have the same wording on both. So this is basically what we've already talked about. Okay. We've already talked about this. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay. Then, additionally, gone through both houses. The U.S. representatives, the Senate. Then it's going to go to the president. Okay. The president then has 10 days to sign or to give a straight-up veto. If the president does not act while Congress is in session, that bill can become a law. Or, right here, it says, when there are less than 10 days left in the congressional calendar, and the president doesn't do anything about it, the bill will die. What we call a pocket veto. Kind of a lesser known, less seen. Okay. Sometimes the president can avoid, or may avoid, signing and may avoid an outright veto because the issue is really controversial and the president doesn't really want to put a stamp on it one way or the other. And pocket veto can be a quiet and subtle way of letting something just die and wither away. Again, 2/3 vote needed to override a veto. That's a lot of people in Congress. When you've got 435 U.S. representatives, 2/3 of that's a lot of people. It doesn't happen very often. Okay, it's a basic. I'll print one of these out and bring this to you guys next week. Okay, let's see. Okay. So with Congress, some of the things that we see with some of the goings on, some of the efforts is they're going to be influenced by political action committees. They're going to be they want to be friendly with the Speaker of the House or leadership, so they can get the cush committee assignments that help them stay elected in their district. They want to be able to get on the floor, get their bills, get their legislation to the floor. We've talked about the role of the whip to really go after votes, to try to figure out where everybody sits on their vote. This is the pork barreling, log rolling. If you'll support my pet project, I'll help you out in supporting yours. And then influencing the president or the president's influence on Congress. Those are some big things that we see with regards to this chapter on Congress. Okay. I talked about oversight, and we talked about advise and consent. I think we really have already gone through that slide. So anyway, that basically wraps up chapter 9 on Congress. Kind of shows you how we stack up men and women. We do have more women in office today than ever before. These are those who are serving in Congress. The majority of them are white, and that's shown by the red coloring. And then the next larger group would be Latino population represented. Okay. Well, I'm gonna let that be the end for you guys. Like I said, I put you out early today, and I'll let your classmates